Okay, this is a 2000 Subaru Outback station wagon, and it's the 2.5 liter opposed 4, which they've been making for a long time. And a little while ago I was repairing this cold air intake tube. It was torn in the rubber, so I put some RTV silicone in it and used some black tape to kind of seal it up until the silicone set, and that seems to have cured that. But while I was poking around, I noticed there was some oil in the top of the motor, the very top up here. Everything down inside here is wet with oil, and we have noticed an oily smell. You can maybe see down in through here, there's some oil pooled up down in the bottom there. And so I was wondering where it came from, so I went online and found in a discussion board that this appears to be the culprit right in here. It's the oil pressure unit, sending unit sensor, and the top of it is all wet with oil. So as typical, I believe it has sprung a leak right up through the center where the electrode connects onto the top of it. So today we're going to replace that and take care of this oily mess that's been going on for I don't know how long. I'm going to start by removing this top guard. I believe all these nuts and bolts are 10 millimeter. So we'll start by taking those off, because what I've seen is I've got to take the alternator and flip it up out of the way to get a better access to the sensor itself. Okay, so I've gone ahead and removed the bolt and nut. And this, I don't know if this is supposed to be attached here, but it's either rusted together or it's supposed to be attached. But I loosened up this bolt right here, which is a pretty long bolt, and it was pretty dry going at first, but it did manage to loosen up. Now I can lift this up and remove it. And now I can loosen up this bolt down in here underneath the belt. You can just see. Once I do that, I can loosen up this tensioner and remove the belt and swing the alternator up out of the way. So I gotta loosen up this bolt here and then this bolt up here. Okay, I've loosened up this bolt, then I loosened up this tensioner bolt quite a bit. As you can see, it's loose now, and I believe we're okay now to remove this bolt, and the whole alternator should swing up out of the way. Okay, I got the bolt out. It threads right into the alternator itself, down in there. And there was a washer on that bolt, so make sure that washer doesn't fall off and fall down in there. But I should be able to pivot, well, once I take the belt off, I should be able to pivot the alternator up and out of the way. So let's take the belt off. Okay, at this point the belt is out of the way, but the alternator will only swing up so far, and it's binding. And it looks like where this has air conditioning, it looks like it can only pivot so far, and it's going to bind in that bracket. So I might be better off just to remove this main bolt, pull the alternator out away from that, and then pivot it up out of the way. So let's try that and see if that works. Okay, here's the bolt that came out that holds the alternator, and there's this strange looking piece on the back. So don't just loosen up the bolt and pull it out. You got to grab that piece before it falls down in the engine somewhere and disappears. So now the bolt is out. Let's see if we can move the alternator now. Okay, well, with the alternator up out of the way, now we can really get at that oil pressure sensor, and you can see how oily it is. So I'm going to wash things down with some brake cleaner first, and then take it out and put the new one in. And the new one, I think it costs like $10 for the new one, something like that. It's not extremely expensive, but maybe you can get a look way in the back in here. Some of the oil that's puddled up, that's been coming out of this sensor for I don't know how long. There, I've pulled the clip off the top of the oil sensor, and I'm going to clean that too. It is pretty much covered with oil. So this thing has been leaking for a while. Well, I've got a little bit of a surprise taking out the old one. I had a feeling this wasn't right. It appears there's a base socket that screws down in there that the sensor screws into. Here's the new sensor. As you can see, it has a small fitting on the end. And here's the one we're replacing. And it's screwed into this base. So I'm gonna have to separate these two. I don't know if I'm the first one to replace this or the second by the looks, because it's got some Teflon tape on it, but go ahead and try to separate these with the proper wrenches and go from there. Well, as it turns out, the two parts did separate. The old sensor came out of this piece, which also has an aluminum washer that goes on underneath it. So it looks like I was not the first person in here to replace this or try to stop a leak, as it's got some kind of silicone material that was put in here. Probably thought it was leaking through the threads when actually it was leaking right through the very top of the sending unit itself, right around that metal pin. That's where the oil has been coming up through. So luckily I got the two of these separated, because I had visions of the end of this sensor just shearing right off, leaving the threads inside this adapter. And I was thinking, well, where am I going to find another adapter? But luckily I don't have to do that now. So I'll clean this up and get the new oil pressure unit in there. It's already come preloaded with some thread locker sealant type stuff. So we'll continue the project. And just like that, the new oil pressure sensor sender unit is in place. I did put some RTV silicone, high temperature silicone, the orange stuff, around the adapter plug when I put that back in, and snug them both together, not gorilla strength tight, but just tight, and then put it back in the engine block and use the sensor itself to tighten the whole thing up. So it's very snug, and the wire is clipped back on. It's time to put the alternator back on, and the belt, and the guard, and put everything back the way it was. Okay, the belt's back on. It's fairly tight. I've snugged it up with the tensioning bolt. This bolt is still loose. This bolt is still loose. But I've got it snug, and I don't want to go too tight. It's almost back to where the threads I can see are a little shiny. It's almost back to where it was. But I'm going to get in and start it up, and since this also runs the power steering pump, I'm going to turn the wheel back and forth, and it's cold right now. So if it doesn't squeal right now, then chances are that's tight enough. Okay, I turned the wheel full both ways, and the belt didn't squeal, and the power steering felt fine, wasn't jumping. Car has 205,000 miles on it, and I think it's good to go for another few thousand anyway. And the worst part of this whole thing was just messing with getting the alternator off and then lining it back up into the bracket here to get the bolt through and get this bolt in. Make sure you give plenty of tension, plenty of release on this. Bring the bolt right up, because otherwise I had to use a pry bar to lift the alternator up the rest of the way so I could get this bolt started back into the flange of the alternator. So if I had loosened this up another few more turns, I would have had enough slack without the belt needing to be a little bit tighter than it should have been to get that bolt started. So something to do a little differently next time, but the new oil sending unit is in there. The oil pressure light went out, so I know it's working, and hopefully it's not leaking anymore. Okay, so I went ahead and tightened up this bolt here. This bolt I'm going to tighten up as soon as I get this flange, flange for this safety cover in place, and then rotate it down where it's supposed to be. Put the bolt in on this end, and then tighten it up. Get the other cover on, and should be good to go. So thanks for watching.